African.
Hello and welcome to China Now. China Now is a show dedicated to providing the world with an overview of today's China. Here, you'll learn about how China works, how China thinks, and how China views itself and the world. The first section of the show is China Current. We'll have Chris from China breaking down some of the most trending stories happening in China at the moment for you, to introduce you to some of the most heated discussions about social issues happening in China right now. And next, the second section, Threshold, will have Lisa explain to you some of the most cutting-edge technological innovations in today's China, to give you a glimpse of what China has been up to in the field of science and technology as a rising global power. Without further ado, let's get started.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to China Currents. I'm Chris. In the West, it's not only wrong, but often illegal for an employer to discriminate against someone with a history of substance use, as long as the person has been rehabbed. But recently in China, the production company behind hit crime drama series The Knockout was pressurized by millions of fans into deleting scenes featuring an actor who turned out to be an ex-junkie in real life, while vowing a zero-tolerance attitude for drug use. The actor played a supporting role of a drug dealer and was lauded at first for his acting skills. But viewers soon recognized him to be the former singer Han Xiao, who was kind of big in the 90s. That made his detention a well-publicized case. In 2009, he was caught by police for taking drugs including meth and ecstasy, and after spending the next 3 years in a mandatory rehab center and having recovered from addiction, he became a drug awareness ambassador appointed by the Beijing city government. And in order to start afresh, he changed his name to Han Pujun and set aside a portion of his wealth to create a charity fund. And over the past decade, he took up acting jobs and played minor roles in a number of TV series without causing suspicion. But this time, the very success of The Knockout blew his cover. Many people are outraged to learn that celebrities with drug-taking history could actually get around anti-drug rules and get back their high-paying jobs. Now, unlikely to make another comeback ever again, Han Xiao's showbiz career has effectively ended, but a moral debate on whether ex-addicts could receive a second chance has begun and ended rather quickly. The public answer is a resounding no. China has a strict legal and moral codes on drug-related issues. While the anti-drug law stipulates that persons receiving treatment of a drug addiction shall not be discriminated against while they go to school, get employed, or receive social welfare, there's a catch to it. You could be subject to additional government decrees and industry rules that bar you from getting back your career. If you're a celebrity, you will never be allowed to re-emerge in public view. For example, the National Radio and Television Administration, China's top media regulator, explicitly bans TV stations and other media outlets from broadcasting any content featuring stars who have used drugs or visited prostitutes. Legal experts say this ban should be interpreted to encompass all platforms, including live streaming, stage shows, and virtually any commercial performance. And that means the moment you're caught using drugs, your stardom is over. Doesn't this contradict with the law? Why is China so unforgiving to those who turn over a new leaf? Why punish them further when they are in need of societal support? But in fact, China is hardly an exception in meting out severe punishment for drug offenses. Asian governments are generally much harsher than the Western counterpart in terms of anti-drug policies. And whatever color ribbon programs there may be, Asian cultures attach much stronger stigma and shame to those with a drug history. Why? Reason number one, history. In ancient China, people used to have a more lax attitude towards drugs, which were concocted by alchemists to boost health, longevity, or sexual performance. And these substances were often toxic and restricted to the upper echelon of a society. But things changed in the 17th century when Western colonial powers got involved in the lucrative opium trade, setting off an enormous social trend in China for smoking opium as a recreational drug. What was thought to be harmless leisure turned out to be life-destroying addiction. And the Qing government had no other choice but banning the use of opium, which led to a clash between China and Britain in the mid-19th century known as the Two Opium Wars. After losing the wars, China was forced to pay money, cede territories, and further open up its market. Worse still, it led to a series of similar arrangements with other colonial powers, effectively plunging China into a century of humiliation. Now if you go to Beijing's Tiananmen Square, there is a giant obelisk called People's Heroes Monument. You will see on its pedestal reliefs depicting 8 major revolutionary events that led to the founding of a new China. And the very first episode among them is the destruction of opium in 1839. The US would ever add Richard Nixon to Mount Rushmore for declaring war on drugs, or erect a statue for the DEA agent who hunted down Pablo Escobar on Lafayette Square. Can you imagine anti-drug movements occupying such a central place in the narrative of regime's legitimacy to rule? That one of the first social reforms introduced by the communist government in the 1950s was to eradicate opium in China. Millions of addicts were forced into treatment, dealers were executed, and poppy fields were replanted with other crops. They were sending a message: never again shall we ever condone something that nearly destroyed us. And for this reason, China doesn't view drug using as a mere personal vice, or drug addiction as a medical condition, but something much more corrupt, dangerous, and inherently evil that could eventually trigger a civilizational collapse. And reason number 2, morality. Every society has its own moral standards, but unlike many places where the church plays a dominant role in teaching morals, China doesn't have a lot of churches, even if you count the underground ones. Religion isn't a central part of Chinese social life. So who's going to shape our character and teach us to be good? The state. Not a church, but a state. There's no separation of church and state. That dichotomy didn't exist in China. In this regard, China is different from many former communist nations where state atheism didn't quite survive the collapse of the Soviet Union. Many former Soviet countries have become more religious. Just look at Putin and his bestie Kirill, the patriarch of Orthodox Church. Because religion was always there, fundamental to people's way of life. But China doesn't have a strong monotheistic tradition. It's not as if revolution or dictatorship suddenly killed it, leaving a natural spiritual vacuum that is to be refilled later. It just wasn't there. So as to create a moral order, the Chinese Confucian state has engaged for centuries the intellectual class, which in modern times has expanded to include writers, musicians, actors, artists, and other cultural workers in general, who, in Joseph Stalin's words, are engineers of the human soul. For example, music is viewed both in ancient Greece and China as a powerful shaper of our character. Those who use it as a vehicle to express possess the ability to profoundly influence us for good or for evil. And not just musicians, but cultural workers in general, through their works, inculcate moral values, provide moral basis, and guide a society along the moral path. In this way, they function like the clergy, save for that they don't officiate weddings. So, in order to maintain a good moral influence on the people, naturally, the government wants to remove bad apples from the barrel, just like the Catholic Church would sack pedophile priests. And to carry this church analogy one step further, think of the best cultural workers, according to the socialist ideal, as canonized saints, for whom moral integrity should weigh as much, if not more, than their artistry. This is what China demands of them. Okay, even before the communists came into power, Chairman Mao delivered a famous speech in Yan'an outlining the role of literary and art workers in the revolutionary struggle, which is not to create art for art's sake, but to serve the proletariat and masses of the people. Translation: as ideological vanguards, you need a sense of direction. And in the post-Mao era, market-oriented reforms gradually reached the cultural field. once was a cautiously guarded bulwark of ideology and gave rise to an entertainment industry that had been non-existent. Money and fame transformed the saints into idols worshipped by millions of people. And the state has also receded from its previously omnipresent role, but still looms large. Now it doesn't always dictate explicitly what kind of cultural product people should or should not consume, as long as they are promoting virtues, pointing in the right direction, and echoing with the main melody. Instead of complaining the Chinese government of being a snoopy meddler, we should probably take a more nuanced view that of why the state insists on moving the whole society in a specific direction. And the third reason is money. We've covered history and politics, two areas most people don't give a whatever. But still, Chinese internet users, ordinary folks like me, were outraged by the ex-Junkie's TV appearance. Some criticisms were so fierce that they could be shocking to strangers from outside our culture. But in China, every time a morally compromised celebrity attempts to make a comeback, he or she is going to face intense public anger. That scum will get a second chance over my dead body. So in spite of being commercially successful, or perhaps exactly because of it, celebrities have trouble coming back. They will not be only deplatformed by the state, but also cancelled by the crowd. Oh yes, another type of cancel culture here, rooted in another kind of social justice. And a surprise? In China, it is widely believed that big money in entertainment has distorted the acting profession, so much so that popular actors and actresses are grossly overcompensated for their often subpar acting skills. Such a reward system that confers an obscene amount of money to the incompetent few can only be justifiable with additional clauses on their behaviors. So celebrities are scrutinized from all angles, sometimes to the extent of being dehumanized. If you think about the idol's implicit bargain of staying single and available to satisfy fans' sexual fantasies, ew, disgusting. But it's almost like a Faustian bargain. Freedom and money, you may only choose one. If you've sold your soul to the devil, play by his rules. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you make mistakes, exit now. Choose any other line of work and the law is there to help you reintegrate into society, but never dream of coming back again. You ruin a chance. As an interesting observation, entertainment industry in the West is just as ruthless, but the effect it has on celebrities and the public opinion around them couldn't be more different. The industry is awash with drugs. The trend has begun at least since the 1930s and got strengthened during the counterculture movement in the 1960s. Songs and movies have started to feature drug use so frequently that an average teenager was exposed to 85 such references per day. And this stat was obtained before the opioid crisis, now more than a decade old. And people argue whether such exposures have educated children to stay away from drugs or encouraged them to experiment with danger. To be frank, contemporary popular culture should at least be partially held accountable for liberalizing the attitude towards psychoactive drugs, which then contributes to drug becoming an epidemic in the West. Not only did it manufacture content that glorifies and glamorizes drug-related lifestyles, but also corrupted role models for young people. Personally, I admit some of the greatest artworks were produced under direct influence of drugs. Young people could be tempted to think that the drugs did wonder to their favorite stars, giving them inspiration. But no. Well, this could be my Chinese bias, but I think more often than not, they were used to calm stage fright, overcome emotional barriers, relieve mental stress, or widen social circles. Of course, it's a two-way thing. A lot of them did drugs before they rose to stardom, but they wouldn't become so reliant and addicted had it not been pushed to the extreme to be milked dry by bosses in an industry. Without drugs, there will be fewer personal tragedies and a richer cultural heritage for mankind. And altogether, these factors have contributed to a huge gap between East and West. It's not just about different perspectives, but it reaches the deepest level of cultures, even reflected in linguistics. In Chinese, we call drugs 毒品, literally poisons. So all drugs are poisons. Heroin, a poison. Coke, a poison. Meth, a poison. LSD, poison. Even the weed is regarded as a poison. Poisons are dangerous. You touch them, you die. On the contrary, real poisons like arsenic and cyanide are called 毒药, or poisonous drugs. Poisonous, sure, but still drugs, maybe past expiration date. So drugs are worse than actual poisons. You think about it, it's quite funny. So that's our attitude toward drugs. Harsh, unforgiving. We're seen as intolerant or even inhumane to many Westerners. But the questions for policymakers are, where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve with all the leniency, sympathy, and tolerance? Would the underground drug lords have any mercy on the law enforcement officers? I don't know. But I know what works for China may not be the right answer for the West, and vice versa. That's why I love our cross-culture show. It brings the world closer. With that, I thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you want to learn more about China or have any thoughts and comments on our show, please contact us at the email address below. Looking forward to hearing from you. And my colleague Lisa will now take over to introduce more exciting technologies from China. Lisa, please.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, I'm Lisa. This is Threshold in China, a segment that gives you a taste of the future before it actually happens. I'm going to talk about emerging technologies that have life-changing potentials and assess their ability to influence our life in the near future. Imagine one day you're sunbathing on the beach, but instead of getting a suntan, you turn green like Hulk. So does everyone else around you. And this is the latest anti-aging treatment. Today, I'm going to show you this new green technology, greener than anything you have seen before. Basically, it turns the human body into a plant that can get its energy by photosynthesis. A group of scientists from China's Zhejiang University, led by Professor Fan Shunwu, have successfully extracted a photosynthetic biological battery telecoid from spinach. I'll talk about this later. They basically injected the stuff into the cartilage of aging mice and cured their osteoarthritis, which is the wearing down of joint cartilage. Now let's take a look at how it works. One of the reasons why we age is the cell in our body can't make enough new stuff and replace the old and dysfunctional ones. Normally, the cells can synthesize proteins and function as enzymes or building block of cells. But as we grow old, the cells in our body gradually lose their energy, and to get them to work, they need to be recharged like batteries. That's what happens to animal cells. Plant cells, on the other hand, can produce energy and oxygen by photosynthesis. What it takes are just sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. What if the animal cells can do the same? First, the team has to acquire a photosynthetic system from the plants, and they choose spinach as the source, allegedly inspired by the cartoon figure Poppy the Sailor, who gained superpower after eating a can of spinach. In spinach, as well as in other green plants, photosynthesis happens in a kind of tiny sacs in the cells, the telecoids, in which Greek literally means sac-like. It is the pigment contained in telecoid that makes the plant green. The telecoid is now a potential biological battery that can recharge the cells. But how to inject this into a mouse cell? Well, they first turned the telecoid into a much smaller nanotelecoid unit. But getting smaller is not enough. You can't just inject alien stuff into animals and hope it will work. The immune system of the animal and human will discover and try to destroy any foreign implants. This is normally done by macrophage, a type of immune cells. Even if the injected material can evade the macrophages and get inside the cell, they are likely to be caught by lysosome, a sphere-shaped sac that contains enzymes and break down foreign objects. So Fan's team has to find a way to smuggle the nanotelecoids unit into mouse cells without triggering the immune response. Their strategy is to coat the nanotelecoid unit with mouse cell membrane so as to trick the cells into seeing them as their own. When the cells in our body need to take in substance from extracellular space, the substance are encapsulated in cell membrane to form a vesicle, which can then safely travel within the cell without being destroyed. Therefore, Fan's team considered using a specific mature cell membrane as a camouflage to evade elimination. What they have to do is to make sure packing all the telecoid protein needed for photosynthesis and keep them intact during the transportation. As I mentioned before, the nanotelecoid unit are injected into the knee cell of 12-week-old mice with osteoarthritis. Once the proteins are shipped and unpacked within the mouse cells, the scientists put them to work by exposing the mouse to red light for 30 minutes. The light penetrates beneath the mouse skin and switches on the proteins of telecoids in the cells, kicking off the photosynthesis. Chemicals storing energy are produced in this process, and in less than 2 hours, the level of energy chemicals were restored to a healthy level. The energy released in these chemicals provided a shoot in the arm for the aging cells and boosted their anabolism. As a result, the overall condition of the cells was significantly improved. To evaluate the improvement of osteoarthritis, Fan's team used the well-established ORIS grading system. The grades range from 0, that is perfectly healthy, to 5, which is really bad. The mice were rated at a 5 before the treatment, and their grades has improved to 1.5 after the treatment. Taking a closer look, Fans and colleagues found that the cartilage cells receiving thylakoid injections had regained their youth. The level of improvement is equivalent to a 60-year-old human turning to the age of 20. After this, the team repeated the experiments on human cartilage cells cultured on Petri dish. The cells were obtained from patients with osteoarthritis undergoing total knee replacement. Applying the procedure on human patients in clinical trial would be the next step. Fan's team is optimistic about the wider application of this technology beyond treating osteoarthritis. The team has filed several related patents and currently focus themselves on converting the technology to products. And according to Fan, the membrane coating technology of nanoparticles has a good potential of mass production. So, how good is it according to the standards of threshold rating? We rate these emerging technologies on a 1 to 5 scale across 3 dimensions: readiness, novelty, and potential impact, or rippleness as I call it. If a technology scores a 3 or above in all 3 dimensions, it reaches the threshold of potentially having a real-world substantial influence. The readiness category refers to the maturity of a technology from lab demonstration to mass production. The novelty score refers to how new the innovation is. 1 means a small differentiation to existing tech, and 5 means the innovation fulfills a new function. Finally, the ripple scale is our opinion on a technology's potential of life-changing impacts and how widely it can be applied elsewhere. How does this thylakoid transplanting technology stack up? In the readiness category, it is a 3. The technology involved are relatively mature, making nanoparticles are a common practice in pharmaceutical industries nowadays. Membrane coating could be harder, but the team has mastered technology and paved the way for mass production. On the other hand, there are still many regulatory and procedural hurdles associated with human testing which must be overcome to turn this into a real product, especially since it hasn't been tested on living patients. Moving on to novelty. Reversing aging process by transplanting thylakoids make human cells produce their own energy is certainly an innovative and bold idea. Therefore, we see a 4. And finally, the ripples rating. If the technology could fulfill the promise of turning back the clock for so many people, it could definitely change our lives. However, even though they have succeeded in treating osteoarthritis, they still have to demonstrate the application of this new technique on other conditions related to aging. So for the time being, it is a 3, and that meets the threshold of real-world influence. After all, immortality is a great temptation for most people. The potentially game-changing benefits of this innovation to the elderly and those with joint problems are obvious, but what I'm excited about is the potential implications of cellular regeneration technology for societies with aging demographies. Aging is a worldwide problem and one that each of us will face in the future. According to the WHO, by 2030, roughly 1.4 billion people will be 60 years old or older. By 2050, that number will rise to 2.1 billion. Once it becomes more mature and more applicable to other elements, cellular regeneration technologies, such as the one that Professor Fan are working on, have the potential not only to radically improve elderly individuals' qualities of life, but also give them, or future us, the opportunities for prolonged health. Moreover, it can also be a preventative treatment. Of course, this all assumes that it matures and becomes more widely accessible. In aging societies with shrinking workforces, this can potentially boost their economy. This technology might even bring the superhumans from the big screens to reality. And those are just a few of the possibilities that this technology may bring to us. There are many other possibilities in which we look forward to your thoughts on how to apply this technology. In the meantime, eat your vegetables.
Thank you, Lisa and Chris. Now, let's turn our eyes outside the studios. Here, you may hear different voices in and about China, entrepreneurs starting their businesses from scratch, or our African friends living in China, or it could be thinkers and scholars sharing their bright ideas about China and the world. Let's keep rolling and see what's for today.
As China offers us an alternative way to develop ourselves, only a liberated path that China has pursued can get us out of the poverty that we are in.
I mean, as early as 55, China stood up for Africa. China stood up for Egypt in the context of the Suez Crisis, when European powers sought to control the canal, which is on Egyptian soil. President Nasser nationalized it.
Young people needed to understand this history in China. Young people needed to understand this history in Africa. Because all over the world, the big changes that take place, the revolutionary changes that take place because of the involvement of young people. Young people are the most moved, quickly moved by injustice, quickly moved by exploitation, quickly moved by oppression. They react very quickly. And if you are not revolutionary as a young person, it's highly unlikely that you'll be a revolutionary in your old age. So we want young people in China, we want young people in Africa to understand where we are coming from, to analyze things for themselves, to see things for themselves, to hear things for themselves, and come to their own conclusions. Because today, lies are being told about China. China is being slandered every day. There is calumny. But how else can they continue to exploit the world if it's not by lies? If it's not by calumny? If it's not by propaganda? They have never hesitated to use lies, to use slander against their opponents, especially over the last couple of years against China. That's the way they operate. Lies is part of their way of operating, way of interacting with the world. But for us, who stand on the other side, lies have never been our methods. Calumny has never been our methods. Falsehoods have never been our methods. The truth moves slowly. Lies move very fast. But unfortunately for lies, they've got short legs. They don't go very far. Truth goes very far. Their lies against China, their propaganda against China is starting to become known. More and more young people in China, in Africa, are starting to understand what the world they live in is. What the lies they are being told, they are starting to see them as lies. And that gives us a lot of confidence. We revolutionaries on the African continent, for the few days I've been here interacting with young people, I'm confident the Chinese revolution is unstoppable, totally unstoppable. A new wave of progressive young people following the footsteps of Chairman Mao, understanding the theories of Deng, and understanding and following very closely the thought of President Xi, will make this Chinese revolution invisible. Those who think this revolution will disappear, they are cheating themselves. This is unstoppable.
For young people everywhere, in Africa, in China, the shared history is often forgotten. Africa started to become independent and the kind of support that China had. But people also need to remember that at some point in history, in the 19th century, we were both colonized. A large part of China was subject to European rule. It was carved up pretty much the way Africa was carved up. You had the French here, you had the British elsewhere, and so on. And I think what China refers to as a century of humiliation, it was in many respects similar to the way Africa was treated. Many, many respects, except we, of course, had the Berlin Conference, which carved us up, into 55 different countries.
That humiliation
China had the correct
unites us.
solution. Yeah.
That history of humiliation, of being colonized or semi-colonized, unites us.
Yeah.
The countries you see in Africa, the 53 or 54 countries you see in Africa, were not there before 1885. Before 1885, it was just one continent with rivers and valleys. We had no countries. They went to Berlin, the major European nations of that time, including the USA, which had just become independent in 1776, was there in Berlin, including representatives of the Tsar in Russia. No representatives from Africa. They went to Berlin and shared Africa among themselves, like a piece of cake, just cutting. So the countries you see today were not created by us Africans. They were created by the Europeans, not for us, but for themselves.
To manage their conflict.
Yes,
Prevent
and they
a
wanted
war.
to continue holding on to these territories for themselves, not for us. They did not create them to give them to us, to manage, to enjoy, to live in. No. They carved them for themselves to continue exploitation of minerals and indeed even of human beings. They traded us like commodities across the Atlantic Ocean. We were bought and sold and resold and resold. We were not only participants on the capitalist market, we were also commodities on it. That history cannot be forgotten.
That's also a history China shares.
That history of humiliation, we share it with China. And that's why the Chinese people understand the pain of humiliation. They know what we went through because they went through it. China today is a great country with a great economy, with a great people. But they don't want to accept that China has made progress. They don't want to accept the achievements of the Chinese people. They still want to play them down. They never want to acknowledge that. We, the friends of China, are seeing that progress. And to us, China offers us an alternative way to develop ourselves. We will never get anywhere following the path paved by our colonizers. Only a liberated path that China has pursued can get us out of the poverty that we are in. We have more to learn from China. We have more to cooperate with China. We have more to do with China. China is a source of inspiration for us. And because it's a source of inspiration for us, we have to defend China. We have to defend the achievements of China because these are our achievements. What China has gained over the last 40 years, a good part of it is starting to get to Africa. As I said, China is helping us build our infrastructure. We have many young people coming to Chinese university to be educated. We need to understand how China has gotten, especially over the last 40 years. We need to understand how China has moved from 1949 to today. We have to understand what type of leadership is needed or was needed and how that leadership was constructed. We need to understand how the Chinese people were mobilized to achieve what they have achieved. This inspiration to us is of great importance. Some people say cooperating with China is having China interfere in our internal affairs. Yes, we know China has a policy of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. But non-interference in the affairs of other countries does not exclude solidarity, does not exclude taking a position It does not mean doing nothing. And what is international solidarity in the first place? International solidarity is a realization that fighting the same war, albeit on different fronts, for the betterment of humanity. We are in the same vessel, headed in the same direction. If this vessel hits an iceberg, all of us perish. The injustice done to one nation, to one people, should be felt by others, deserves indignation from others. China has been built on those lines of international solidarity, of caring for other human beings, of sharing, and of ensuring a peaceful world. That's what builds peace.
China has built itself up without invading anybody, without enslaving anybody, without colonizing anybody, as you said. And really, if Africa is looking at its options today, there's nobody to enslave. Who are you going to enslave in today's world? Who is Africa going to colonize in order to extract their resources and use to build up in the way that Europe was built on the basis of African blood and sweat? It's not an option. Realistically speaking, in today's world, the only way forward is through a reorganization of society. China has demonstrated that that's possible. The Soviet Union demonstrated it, but ran into internal problems and collapsed. China has taken that much, much further and has demonstrated that it is possible to develop a country, to develop sovereignty, to develop dignity and security without militarization, without having to impose your will forcibly on other people and suppress other people. That has to be the vision of the future. In the nuclear world, there's no other way to grow. If social development is based on military conflict, then we're all dead within a few decades at worst. That can't be the future. So the powers who are busy building military bases, trying to enforce their access to other people's resources, other people's land, they're lost. They're taking us all into a tailspin to death and destruction. There is no future for even their own children on the path that they're leading. It's such a glaring thing.
Genuine goodness is always threatening to those on the other side of the moral spectrum. The goodness, the genuineness, the solidarity, the selflessness of China cannot be understood by those on the other side of the moral spectrum. They can't understand it. Mm-hmm. They cannot understand that we can have a relationship with China that is not abusive, that is not exploitative, a relationship in which we are not humiliated, but we are treated with respect as equals. They can't understand that because throughout the capitalist existence, there has been domination, subjugation, humiliation, exploitation, suppression of others. They can't understand that a country can develop without colonizing another country, without humiliating another people. That's what China has done. Again, genuine goodness is always threatening to those on the other side of the moral spectrum.
They built a world in which, from their own statistics, 8 individual human beings own more wealth than half of the globe. 4 billion people own less wealth than the top 8 individuals. How is that sustainable when you have these crushing extremes of poverty and deprivation? How is that democratic? How can you build a democratic world?
They have created a world that today even they themselves are scared of.
Scared of it.
This is the world that is destroying the environment. This is the world that is increasing poverty. This is the world that is creating unemployment.
That can't deal with pandemics.
That can't deal with pandemics, can't deal with the problem of inequality, growing inequality. Every year in winter, they go to Davos. The best economic thinkers of capitalism, the best businessmen of capitalism, the leading statesmen of capitalism, they go to Davos in Switzerland for the World Economic Forum. What do they discuss at Davos? Principally, they discuss 3 or 4 issues. They discuss growing inequality in the world, growing poverty in the world, growing unemployment in the world, and the destruction of the environment. These are the things they discuss, year in, year out. But they can't come up with solutions. We have not seen solutions from Davos. Why? Is it because they don't have good economists? They don't have good political thinkers, good sociologists, and so on? No, they have them. The problem is to resolve these 4 problems. To deal with these 4 problems, capitalism has to disappear. Capitalism has to go. Are they ready to make capitalism disappear? No, they are not ready.
They're ready to build more military bases.
And because they are not ready to let capitalism go, they come up with interventions that do not cure the problem, but simply try to stabilize, to reduce the impacts.
It's largely public relations.
Yes.
To make them look good.
But eventually, they will have to die. Yeah. Eventually, they will have to die. There's no alternative to that. This is the world we live in. So for us, it's very encouraging to see young Chinese people pick up the revolutionary banner that was passed to them by older generations of revolutionaries, outstanding revolutionaries, the core leaders of the Chinese Revolution. They are picking up this banner in new times, in new ways, but with the same determination and the same zeal, the same discipline, the same tenacity with which the older generations struggled to give us the China we have today.
Welcome back to China Now. I hope you enjoyed the show today. China Now is a show dedicated to providing the world with an overview of today's China. Here, you will learn about how China works, how China thinks, and how China views itself and the world. We hope to show you a different world, a different culture, and a different way of thinking. Let China not be far from you anymore. If you still want to know other things about China, please contact us through the email below. Thanks for watching and see you next week.